A 16-year-old Leper King rode at the front of 500 exhausted knights, facing an army of 26,000. The sun was setting over the desert near Montgisard, and every military mind in Christendom would have said what he was about to do was suicide. His advisors begged him to retreat. His body was ravaged by disease, half his face already disfigured, his hands wrapped in bandages to hide the decay. He could barely grip the reins. But Baldwin IV of Jerusalem did not retreat. He raised the true cross high above his head, turned to his outnumbered, terrified men, and said words that would echo through 8 centuries. God wills it. And then he charged. What happened next defied every law of war, every expectation of logic, and every prediction of history. It was November 25th, 1177, and it was the day 500 men destroyed an empire. This is not a myth. This is not a legend inflated by time. This is documented history recorded by both Christian and Muslim chroniclers who struggled to explain what they witnessed. This is the Battle of Montgisard, one of the most improbable military victories ever recorded, a moment when courage and desperation collided with fate and created something that still defies explanation. Today we step onto that battlefield, we walk beside that dying boy king, and we try to understand how 500 knights did what should have been impossible. Welcome to English Mindset, where we uncover the moments in history that test the limits of human will, where we explore the battles that should have been lost but were won, where we ask the questions that history leaves unanswered. Today, we tell the story of Montgisard not just as a battle, but as a study in leadership, in faith, in the refusal to accept the inevitable. If you have ever faced impossible odds, if you have ever been told that what you are attempting cannot be done, if you have ever wondered what separates those who surrender from those who fight, stay with me. Because this story will challenge everything you believe about power, about numbers, and about what is possible when you refuse to quit. The year was 1177. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, established by the First Crusade 78 years earlier, was dying. It was a narrow strip of coastal land, surrounded by hostile Muslim states, constantly under siege, constantly bleeding knights and resources. And leading this fragile kingdom was Baldwin IV, crowned at 13, diagnosed with leprosy at 9. By 16, he was already losing feeling in his hands and feet. By 24, he would be blind. By 25, he would be dead. He was a king with no future, leading a kingdom with no hope. And yet, he refused to surrender. His greatest enemy was Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, one of the most brilliant military commanders in Islamic history. Saladin had united the Muslim world under his banner, and his goal was clear: destroy the Crusader states and reclaim Jerusalem. He had the army, he had the resources, he had time. And in November 1177, he invaded the Kingdom of Jerusalem with 26,000 men, the largest force he had ever assembled. His target was not a fortified city. It was the undefended heartland. He planned to march straight to Jerusalem, burn it, and end the Crusader presence in the Holy Land forever. Baldwin IV had a problem. Most of his army was in the north, engaged in another conflict. He had no time to recall them. No time to fortify, no time to prepare. All he had were the knights in Jerusalem, perhaps 500, maybe fewer. And he had a choice. He could retreat into the city, bar the gates and hope the walls held, or he could do something insane. He could attack. Every advisor told him to retreat. The Templars, the military order sworn to defend the Holy Land, told him to wait. The barons, the lords who owed him allegiance, told him the odds were suicide. Even his closest friends told him that charging Saladin's army with 500 men was not bravery, it was madness. But Baldwin IV understood something they did not. If Saladin reached Jerusalem unopposed, if he burned the holy city, the kingdom would fall. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Morale would collapse. The Crusader states would fragment, and everything the First Crusade had won would be lost. So Baldwin made a decision. He would not wait for Jerusalem to burn. He would meet Saladin in the desert, and he would fight. If this story is gripping you, if you're starting to feel the weight of that decision, the impossible courage it took for a dying teenager to lead 500 men against an empire, then let me ask you to do something. If you believe stories like this, stories of defiance and faith and the refusal to accept defeat deserve to be told, hit the like button. Not because I am asking, but because history should remember not just the victories, but the moments when people chose to fight, when every rational mind said to flee. On November 24, 1177, Baldwin IV rode out of Jerusalem with his 500 knights. They carried the true cross, the most sacred relic in Christendom, believed to be a fragment of the cross on which Christ was crucified. Its presence was meant to inspire, but it also revealed how desperate they were. Bringing the true cross into battle was a last resort. If it was captured, the psychological blow would be devastating. But Baldwin had no choice. He needed every advantage, real or symbolic, that he could get. Saladin's army was camped near the town of Montgisard, about 20 miles from Jerusalem. They were resting, confident, undisciplined. Saladin had sent raiding parties into the countryside, burning villages, taking plunder. His main force was scattered, relaxed, celebrating their unopposed march. Saladin himself believed that Baldwin would never dare to attack. He thought the Crusaders would hide behind their walls and wait. He was wrong. Baldwin's scouts found Saladin's camp in disarray. The Sultan's army was spread out, unarmored, many of them away from the main body. It was the only weakness Baldwin would ever get, and he knew that if he hesitated, if he waited even one more day, that weakness would close. So on the afternoon of November 25th, Baldwin IV gave the order. Charge. 500 knights in full armor, riding heavy war horses, thundered across the desert toward an army 50 times their size. It should have been a slaughter. It should have been the end of the kingdom of Jerusalem. But something happened that no one, not Baldwin, not Saladin, not the chroniclers who recorded it, could fully explain. The charge hit Saladin's camp like a lightning strike. The Crusaders smashed into the scattered, unarmored soldiers with devastating force. The knights were trained for this, bred for this, armored in steel and riding animals that weighed over 1,000 pounds. They were shock troops, designed to break enemy lines. And in that moment, against an enemy caught off guard, they were unstoppable. Saladin's men panicked. They were warriors, experienced, brave, but they were not prepared. They were not armored. They were not formed into ranks, and they were not expecting 500 maniacs to charge an army of 26,000. The Crusaders carved through the camp, killing, trampling, scattering. Saladin tried to rally his men. He rode into the chaos, shouting orders, forming defensive lines, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted, and once an army starts to break, once fear takes hold, it spreads like fire. The battle became a rout. Saladin's soldiers fled. They abandoned their weapons, their armor, their plunder. They ran into the desert, and the Crusaders pursued, cutting them down. Thousands died. Thousands more were captured. Saladin himself barely escaped, fleeing with a small bodyguard, riding through the night, humiliated, defeated, haunted by the impossible. By the time the sun set, the battlefield was silent. 500 knights stood among the bodies of an empire's army. They were exhausted, bloodied, disbelieving. They had won, not just survived. Won. Saladin's invasion was over. His army was shattered. And the kingdom of Jerusalem, which should have fallen, endured. Let me ask you something. How do you explain this? How do 500 men defeat 26,000? Was it luck? Was it Saladin's arrogance? Was it the element of surprise? Or was it something else? Something that the chroniclers called a miracle? Something that defies rational explanation? Drop a comment and tell me, because I want to know. What do you think turned the tide at Montgisard? The Christian chroniclers called it divine intervention. They said God himself fought for Baldwin, that angels appeared on the battlefield, that the true cross radiated light that blinded Saladin's men. Muslim chroniclers did not mention angels, but they struggled to explain the defeat. Some blamed Saladin's overconfidence, some blamed the disorder of the camp, but all of them acknowledged that what happened should not have been possible. Modern historians offer more pragmatic explanations. They point to the tactical advantage of heavy cavalry against scattered unarmored infantry. They point to the shock value of the charge. They point to Saladin's complacency. But even the most skeptical historians admit that the odds were so overwhelming, the circumstances so unlikely, that Montgisard remains one of the most extraordinary victories in military history. But the real miracle of Montgisard was not the battle itself. It was Baldwin, a 16-year-old boy dying of leprosy who led from the front, who refused to let his disease define him, who made a decision that every rational person called suicide and turned it into triumph. That is the miracle, not angels, not divine light, but human courage in the face of impossible odds. After Montgisard, Baldwin IV became a legend. Songs were written about him, poems celebrated him. He was the Leper King, the boy who defied an empire. But the victory did not save him. His disease progressed. Within a year, he could no longer ride. Within 2 years, he could no longer walk. Within 5 years, he was carried on a litter, his body so ravaged that he could not feed himself. And yet, he continued to rule. He continued to lead. He continued to fight. Because that is what leaders do. They do not quit, even when their bodies betray them. Saladin never forgot Montgisard. It haunted him. He rebuilt his army. He planned his revenge. And in 1187, 10 years after his humiliation, he returned. This time, he did not underestimate the Crusaders. This time, he crushed them at the Battle of Hattin, destroyed their army, and captured Jerusalem. Baldwin IV had been dead for 2 years. The kingdom he had saved at Montgisard fell. But his defiance, his refusal to surrender, bought the Crusader states a decade of survival, a decade of hope. And that matters. If you are still with me, if this story is making you think about leadership, about courage, about the difference between surrender and defiance, then I need you to subscribe to English Mindset. Not because I'm telling you to, but because we are building something here. A community that believes history is not just about what happened, but about what we can learn, about what still matters. Turn on notifications. Stay with us. Because there are 1,000 stories like this, buried in the past, waiting to be told. The legacy of Montgisard is not just military, it is psychological. It proved that numbers do not determine outcomes, that morale, leadership, timing, and courage can overcome overwhelming force, that the impossible is only impossible until someone does it. And that lesson resonates far beyond the battlefield. In our own lives, we face moments where the odds are against us, where every rational voice tells us to quit, where the sensible choice is to retreat, to compromise, to accept defeat. And in those moments, we have a choice. We can listen to the voices of caution, or we can do what Baldwin did. We can charge, not recklessly, not stupidly, but with full awareness of the risk, with full commitment to the cause, with the refusal to let fear dictate our actions. Baldwin IV did not win because he was stronger than Saladin. He won because he was willing to risk everything. And that willingness, that total commitment, changed the outcome. It always does. Not always in the way we hope, not always with victory, but it changes the outcome. It makes the impossible possible. And that is the lesson of Montgisard. Let me tell you what happened to the true cross. After Baldwin's death, after the disaster at Hattin, Saladin captured it. He paraded it through the streets of Damascus, upside down, dragged in the dirt, a symbol of Crusader defeat. It was never recovered. Its fate remains unknown. Some say it was destroyed. Some say it was hidden. But its loss broke the spirit of the Crusader states in a way that military defeats never could. Because symbols matter. Faith matters. And when you lose the thing that represents your cause, you lose part of your will to fight. But Montgisard reminds us of something else. That even when the relic is gone, even when the symbol is lost, the spirit remains. Baldwin did not need the true cross to be brave. He carried it for his men to inspire them. But his courage came from within, and that is what endures. There is a grave in Jerusalem, unmarked, anonymous, that some historians believe is Baldwin IV's. He was buried without ceremony, his body too disfigured to display, his reign too controversial to celebrate. He died alone, in pain, forgotten by many. But he should not be forgotten. He was a boy who became a king, a leper who became a warrior, a leader who refused to quit even when his body was falling apart. And he saved a kingdom, if only for a little while. Let me ask you one final question. What would you have done? If you were Baldwin, if you were 16 and dying and facing an army that could crush you, would you have charged? Or would you have retreated, preserved your strength, lived to fight another day? There is no wrong answer, but the question reveals something about who we are, about what we value, about what we are willing to risk. Tell me in the comments, because I want to know. What does courage look like to you? The story of Montgisard is also a story about faith. Not just religious faith, though that was part of it, but faith in something larger than yourself. Faith that your actions matter, even when the outcome is uncertain. Faith that doing the right thing, the hard thing, is worth it, even if you lose. Baldwin had that faith, and it carried him through a life that should have broken him. We live in a cynical age. We are told that heroism is naive, that faith is weakness, that the only rational response to overwhelming odds is to calculate, to compromise, to survive. But Baldwin reminds us that survival is not the highest goal, that there are things worth fighting for, even when the fight seems hopeless. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Montgisard also teaches us about the danger of overconfidence. Saladin was one of the greatest commanders in history, but at Montgisard he underestimated his enemy. He assumed that numbers alone would guarantee victory. He did not prepare, he did not expect resistance, and he paid for it. Arrogance, no matter how justified by past success, is a weakness. And the moment you stop respecting your opponent, you give them an opening. Baldwin, by contrast, respected Saladin. He knew he was outmatched. He knew the odds. But he also knew that Saladin's strength was his weakness. A large army is hard to control, hard to organize, hard to keep disciplined. And in that brief window of disorganization Baldwin struck. It was not luck. It was strategy. Desperate, audacious, insane strategy, but strategy nonetheless. The knights who charged with Baldwin that day deserve to be remembered too. They were not saints. They were not paragons of virtue. Many of them were younger sons of European nobles sent to the Holy Land because they had no inheritance at home. Some were criminals, seeking redemption through war. Some were fanatics. Some were adventurers. But when Baldwin called, they followed. And they rode into hell for a boy king they barely knew because he asked them to. What makes people do that? What makes soldiers follow a leader into certain death? It is not fear. Fear makes you obey orders. But it does not make you charge. It is not duty. Duty makes you stand your ground. But it does not make you attack. It is something else. It is belief. Belief in the leader. Belief in the cause. Belief that this moment, this decision, this impossible charge matters. And Baldwin gave them that belief. He led from the front. He did not ask them to do anything he was not willing to do himself, and that is why they followed. After Montgisard, Baldwin's health deteriorated rapidly, but his reputation grew. He became a symbol not just in the Crusader states, but across Europe. He was proof that nobility was not about bloodlines or health or power. It was about character, about choosing to lead when you could have abdicated, about choosing to fight when you could have fled, about choosing to endure when you could have surrendered. When Baldwin finally died in 1185 at the age of 24, the kingdom of Jerusalem began its final decline. Without his leadership, the fractious barons turned on each other. The unity that had held the kingdom together dissolved. And when Saladin returned in 1187, there was no Baldwin to stop him. Jerusalem fell. The Crusader states crumbled, and the Third Crusade, led by Richard the Lionheart, could only partially restore what was lost. But Montgisard remained. A reminder that one moment of courage can change history. That one leader, however flawed, however doomed, can inspire people to do the impossible. That numbers do not determine fate. Will does. Before we end, let me tell you one more thing. In the Chronicles, there is a moment, just before the charge, when Baldwin turned to his knights and said something that was not recorded in full. The chronicler only wrote, "He spoke of glory and of God, and of the duty we owe to those who cannot fight for themselves." Whatever he said, it was enough. 500 men charged, and an empire broke. That is the power of words. That is the power of leadership. That is the power of belief. And it is not limited to battlefields or kings. It is available to all of us, in our own struggles, in our own moments of decision, when we choose to stand or run, to fight or surrender, to believe or despair. Thank you for walking through this story with me. If it moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that courage still matters, hit the like button. If you want to keep exploring the moments in history that reveal what we are capable of, subscribe to English Mindset and turn on notifications, because we are just getting started. And history has so much more to teach us. I will see you in the next story.